Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Crystal Bedley, and I am the Senior Director of the Tyler Clementi Center for Diversity Education and Bias Prevention, who's hosting today's event. I have to say, this event looks much different than we originally envisioned, and you all know why, right? As our institution has gone through flux, I'm glad to see that we're getting closer towards resolution, but it also led us to make some profound and significant changes. I'm really grateful. So I want to tell you a little bit about the formation of this, how it came about, and then we'll dive right into our talk for today. This was the Research2Practice Symposium. We look forward to having this event again in the future when there isn't a strike taking place. And it's really designed to showcase the wonderful contributions that our researchers on campus, our faculty, our graduate students, our postdoctoral trainees have been doing to translate their expertise and scholarship into practical tools for the Rutgers community. We're grateful that, Melinda, I'm going to put you on the spot momentarily just to wave as one of our fellows from this year's cohort. Yes. And we are going to find ways to get their educational tools, right? So the point of this program, they've been involved in a year-long program to translate their research into an educational tool. And we are working towards finding a way to showcase those tools. So stay tuned for some additional innovative opportunities to learn and grow. But today, we actually have the really beautiful fortune. I like to think about where opportunities lie, even in the face of challenges, and we can focus on how we can bridge our research and practice in a pathway towards social change. And there is no one better to take us on this journey than today's keynote. I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce Filipina scholar, educator, community organizer, farmer in training, Dr. Robin Magalit Rodriguez. Yes. No, I have more to say, but yes, I'm so thrilled. Her accolades are many. As I attempted to sort of figure out how do I distill this into a minute or two, know that you are getting the Cliff Notes version of a really illustrious, profound career. She's a published author dozens of times over. She founded the first research center to focus on Filipinx experiences, centered at UC Davis. She started numerous community networks, has been involved in community organizing for decades, right? And supporting those who needed it most. She showed me that being true to ourselves, She won awards for her outstanding mentoring, and she's now building a sanctuary for social justice-oriented scholars, teachers, students, activists, community organizers, and artists, creatives, entrepreneurs, right, to engage in rejuvenation, creation, and education. Really amazing vision. And through this journey, she unsurprisingly had to be the first, and often the only, to lead the path for many of these endeavors. Personally, Robin was the first person to welcome me to Rutgers 16 years ago. She was my first official advisor in my PhD program, for those that don't know. She was the first person to hear me when I felt like an imposter and steadfastly committed to holding a mirror up to my value. She showed me the importance of making what we now call safe spaces. I think that language was just coming into parlance at that time, right? But creating those safe spaces to problem solve and strategize, how to overcome systemic barriers. I'm going off script a moment here to say that I'm so glad that Dr. Dinzy Flores could be in the room with us because her and Dr. Rodriguez started a Women of Color Scholars Initiative in my early days at the institution. And work that sort of has permeated and continues in new iterations, right? She taught me how to build community with other marginalized folks so that we can lean on each other when we need it most. And she showed me that being true to ourselves and uplifting others may be challenging at times, but is probably the purest definition of success. I'm so very grateful that she'll be entering into conversation with us today. And there will definitely be time for Q&A. She wants to be able to engage with the audience, to continue to impart her wisdom and help us identify the tools that we need to thrive in spaces not meant for us and change them to reflect our strengths. And with that, I would love a warm round of applause for Dr. Robin Magalit Rodriguez.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Dr. Bedley. I love it. I'm just so pleased to be back here where I started my academic career, to be with among good friends and colleagues. So let's do this. Let's see if it works. Okay, ready? Okay, so I'm going to actually start reading from the preface of my book, In Lady Liberty's Shadow, Race and Immigration in New Jersey. I think of this book as my love letter to New Jersey, particularly immigrant New Jersey. It comes out of my work as an immigrant rights and anti-racism scholar activist, and thus from a deep place of identification with and affection for the people I worked with, people who have made the state their home and yet are treated like outsiders. Even though there's much that I'm critical about, I came to love a lot about New Jersey in the time that I lived and worked there. I loved its incredible diversity. Although I am an immigration scholar and a native Californian who grew up in what some scholars call a majority-minority ethnoburb, like many of the communities I would get to know during my time on the East Coast, my home state simply does not possess the same degree of diversity that New Jersey does. People who identify as Black or African American or in New Jersey are just as likely to be recent immigrants from Africa or the Caribbean as they are to be people with long roots in the US. People I thought of as white could be fluent in any number of Western and European languages and identify more as immigrants than Americans. Not only could I easily find the cuisines of my childhood hometown of Union City, California, namely Filipino, Mexican, and Vietnamese food, but I also found myself discovering new tastes and cultural traditions I had not yet been exposed to. Encountering such wonderfully amazing diversity, I was taken aback and rather disappointed by the fact that the state is so deeply segregated. My newly adopted town, Highland Park, just across the river, a charming borough where many Rutgers faculty and graduate students live, has been lauded for its diversity. Many of its residents are quite self-congratulatory about the diversity of the town, and yet I quickly learned that it was a town divided. A mere 2 square miles, and everyone, unless you were in denial, knows exactly where the white and Black or non-white parts of town are. It's probably still true today. For the most part, you know that the north side is the better white area, where many of my colleagues lived. The south side is okay, along with the blocks from South 7th and, just don't go past South 6th, okay? You stay above in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is okay. The triangle, along with the blocks from South 7th and higher, pretty much constitutes the ghetto, Black, brown, working class, and immigrants. We lived on South 7th by choice. I wanted my biracial Filipino and South African son to live with people he could share a connection with. While one of my son's white friend's parents, they were immigrants from Russia, refused to let him come over because we lived in the bad part of town. It helped, of course, when they found out I was a professor. We loved where we lived. Our neighbors included second-generation Costa Rican couple, an elderly African-American couple with roots in the South, an immigrant family from Sierra Leone, and a mixed family. The wife was Puerto Rican and her husband Jewish. I think most of us lived on South 7th because we were invested in diversity and made active efforts to connect with one another, despite the fact that the rest of our town lived very different and very separate lives. Maybe it's not totally coincidental that one of the most outspoken African-American civil rights activists in the town's recent history, Vicky White, lived on our street, and parts of the street was actually named after her. My students told me similar stories about their towns. Although many of them came from a vast array of ethnic and racial backgrounds, they lived highly segregated lives. They knew very little about people whose ethnic or racial background they did not share, or even about the towns neighboring the ones where they grew up. Those who lived in communities like the one I grew up in seemed to have far more cloistered existences than my own. Nearly all of my high school friends married or were partnered to people of different racial, ethnic background. With few exceptions, that did not seem to be the case for the young New Jerseyans I met in my classes. This book emerged in part out of my desire to gain understanding of the dynamics of race and immigration in my newly adopted state, so that I could better connect with and teach my students. In order to get insider perspectives, I organized my undergraduate courses around the themes that now organize this book, including a course with Professor Carlos de Sena. I gave my students assignments that would help me better understand where they were coming from, even as I was trying to get them to apply ideas we discussed in class to their everyday lives. More important, though, this book is motivated by my work as a scholar activist. In late 2005, I joined the faculty of the sociology department here as an assistant professor. Having worked as an immigrant rights and anti-racism activist for many years prior to moving to New Jersey, I was anxious to get involved in social justice work in my new state. I could continue on, but I think the real point here for me is this. This excerpt comes from the very first pages of my book in the preface, what many serious scholars may skip and consider no better than marginalia, those notes to self that we scribble in the margins of texts, marginal to the central arguments of the book in hand. The marginalia are not thought of as the thing that we're working on. Yet the truth is, it is often, as in the case for this book, everything. In this talk, I take the so-called marginalia seriously. The marginalia, especially for those of us who come from the margins of academia, is often vital. It is where our identities and the communities that have shaped them, ourselves, appear in ways that academia would otherwise dismiss them. The title of this talk, yeah, that's me in high school. That's me a couple years ago. The title of this talk is Centering Love, Engaged Research for Scholars on the Margins. I chart how I navigated academia as a marginalized academic, especially as a woman of color, specifically a Filipina scholar activist. Not only do I bring my identities, but also my politics to the center of my discussion. I focus in on what drives my research, and maybe yours, and that's love. Love for my family, for my neighborhood, love for my students, and perhaps most importantly, love for justice. As I wrote in this preface, love is what has motivated my work. Like many of you, I've learned to craft my elevator speech about my work. That quick synopsis of your research interests that you can quickly draw on in introducing yourself to colleagues. We all know that we are meant in this elevator speech to share the kinds of research questions we address. Research questions that must be situated within the relevant scholarship in our fields of study. The stuff of lit reviews. We're to share the kinds of data we've collected in the case of social scientists, or archives we're mining, or texts and cultural artifacts we're analyzing for historians or humanities scholars. Left unsaid in this elevator speech is the big why that motivates what we are doing, especially if that why is deeply personal. We leave the why out if it is in some way connected to our sense of selves as people. If the personal is also political, if we think of ourselves as activists or community organizers, committed to knowledge production for our people, it is even less relevant. As scholar activist Sonera Tabani put it, universities demand an academic elitism, which insists that academics should remain above the fray of political activism and use only disembodied, objectified language and a properly dispassionate professorial demeanor to establish our intellectual credentials. The work of research and scholarship in academia must be done dispassionately, as Tabani describes it. We are told that rational, as opposed to emotional, or objective versus subjective analysis is the only kind of analysis that can produce legitimate forms of knowledge. We're trained to distance ourselves from the topic and the people, the topics and people we study, because sustaining distance makes for better knowledge. What can it look like, however, to do things differently? What would it look like to center love? This talk is divided into 3 big sections. The first, I will discuss how I define love, particularly radical love, in the context of my scholar-activist work. Being rooted in radical love, I argue, is what distinguishes scholar activism as a praxis from what is typically defined as community or publicly engaged scholarship. I overview the ways my scholar activism traces its genealogy to ethnic studies, what some may also refer to as critical race theory, which itself was embedded in the racial justice movements of the late 1960s. In the second part of my talk, I'll chart my journey through academia as a scholar activist, starting with my experiences as a student and proceeding through key highlights over the course of my academic career. I'll provide illustrations of the ways radical love has animated my work to showcase what can be possible when it comes to negotiating with the demands of being at a major research university, including this one, and balancing those demands against the needs of the communities to which we are committed. I will illustrate the practice of radical love in my work as a scholar activist, which I'm also still trying to theorize. But I take inspiration here from Black feminist Bell Hooks, who writes, "Love is as love does. Love is an act of will, both an intention and an action." For Hooks, love, and for me, love is not a noun, but a verb. Thus, my practice may demonstrate most about what radical love means in ways that may escape words. In the final section of my talk, I'll raise questions about the limits of centering radical love in academic work within the context of the neoliberal university. I hope that in sharing my journey as a scholar activist in academia, how I've tried to enact radical love in my work, you may be able to put together a roadmap of how you might navigate through your own journeys. Engaged scholarship has come to enjoy a new kind of legitimacy in academia of late. There is, for example, a mechanism by which universities can actually earn official designations as community-engaged campuses, right? There's this elective classification for community engagement through Carnegie. Engaged scholarship is officially defined as collaboration between institutions of higher education and their larger communities, local, regional, state, national, global, for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in the context of partnership and reciprocity. That's the official definition. The purpose of community education, this sort of official definition continues. The purpose of community education is the partnership of college and university knowledge and resources with those of the public and private sectors to enrich scholarship, research, and creative activity, enhance curriculum, teaching and learning, prepare educated and engaged citizens, strengthen democratic values and civic responsibility, address critical societal issues, and contribute to the public good. It's a mouthful. But it exists as an official definition. The possibility exists for the official classification and designation. Rutgers, I think all of the campuses earned the classification. UC Davis, where I've spent the later part of my career, earned the classification as well. I suspect classification positions universities to better secure funding from government entities like the National Endowment for the Humanities, which has funding for public humanities, or foundations like the Mellon Foundation to secure funding for community research, to community-engaged research, which is again also inclusive of public humanities. There are entities like Imagining America, a consortium of colleges and universities committed to engaged scholarship, and for which I actually serve as a member of the National Advisory Board, has also played a role in institutionalizing engaged scholarship. Its national headquarters are at UC Davis. In the field of sociology, where I received my training, my dissertation chair, Michael Buravoy, faculty in the Department of Sociology at UC Berkeley, spelled out his definition of engaged scholarship, or public sociology, during his presidential address to the American Sociological Association in 2004. For Buravoy, public sociology, broadly defined, brings sociology in conversation with publics, understood as people who are themselves involved in conversation. It is sociology's role for Buravoy to defend the interests of humanity. His intervention was important for occurring at a particular historical moment. His address was delivered a year after the war in Iraq was declared by President George W. Bush in the early period of the long, not yet fully concluded global war on terror. It was a crucial time for all scholars, not just sociologists, to critically reflect on our role in society and to be decisive about positioning in defense of humanity. Buravoy's intervention was personally significant for me in the sense that it affirmed the work I was doing during the course of my graduate studies. Interestingly, I was, as I stated, a student of Buravoy's. He was my chair. Though a crucial reason for why I was compelled to work with him was because of his own track record of engaged scholarship. Buravoy had long worked in support of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. We never discussed engaged scholarship or public sociology in any formal way. I didn't discuss my activist work with him because he often hinted, if not explicitly advised, against my sustained engagement in social justice work. I could deviate from the focus of my dissertation, he suggested. In my training, engaged scholarship will still require distance. Being an engaged scholar could not mean being an engaged activist. I kept our discussions strictly professional, as if my research questions were strictly academic, informed only by debates and conversations in the field, when in fact they were very much driven by my embeddedness in and commitment to the various social movements, including the anti-war movement at that time, and enjoyed a new resurgence in the early 2000s. I was also highly involved in immigrant justice movements as we responded to the domestic counterpart to the global war on terror, the increasing detention and deportation of immigrants deemed threatening to homeland security. Now, nearly 4 decades before Buravoy's speech on public sociology and all of these more recent articulations of engaged research or public scholarship, however, alternative visions were being forged at Buravoy's own institution of UC Berkeley and just across the bridge at San Francisco State University. It was these visions that were more directly impactful on my work, despite the fact that I studied under Buravoy. These visions of what now might be called engaged scholarship were not being articulated by academics, but by students in their struggles for ethnic studies. In 1968, students led by the Third World Liberation Front, along with allied faculty and staff and members of the community, went on strike, first at San Francisco State University and then later at UC Berkeley, demanding what would later be termed ethnic studies. Filipinos, like me and other descendants of Asian immigrants, alongside Black, Chicano, and other students of color, led the struggle for ethnic studies, which emerged from the convergence of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and the interracial labor solidarity, exemplified by the founding of the United Farm Workers, led by the lesser-known but equally vital Filipino-American labor leader Larry Itliong, alongside the much better-known Mexican-American labor leader, Cesar Chavez. After a tense and violent struggle on both campuses, students were successful in making their respective university administrations respond with the creation of ethnic studies. It's important to underscore this key point. Ethnic studies as a field of study exists only because radical students of color who were shaped by and engaged with broader social justice movements led the charge. Just as importantly, how this movement for ethnic studies defined the purpose of knowledge and knowledge production is vital. And this is sort of illustrated, I think, in a statement by the Filipino American Collegiate Endeavor, or PACE, one of the student groups involved in the Third World Liberation Front, and where I draw kind of a direct lineage. We, the Filipinos, have come to the realization, along with our third world brothers, that the struggle for self-determination is the struggle of all third world peoples. That the neutrality which for the most part kept our community from progressing in this racist society cannot be tolerated or practiced any longer. It is therefore evident to Filipinos in San Francisco State that racism is not only leveled at our black brother, but at us as well, when we consider the prevailing opportunities denied to Filipinos, exploitation of Filipino workers. These conditions should and must be eliminated for the betterment of our community. We demand that there be established within the School of Ethnic Studies a Department of Filipino Studies, and that within that department, individuals who comprise the Department of Filipino Studies will have complete control of its business, including faculty, practices, and course material. That was their demand. For me, PACE provides an outline for what I would suggest is an approach to engage scholarly practice or praxis that's rooted in radical love. PACE calls for an end of neutrality. It suggests that knowledge, and by extension knowledge production, ought to incite members of the community towards dismantling systems of power for the betterment of our community. Part of my purpose in tracing this particular genealogy of engaged research here is to center ethnic studies as a field of study. Over the course of its 50-plus year history, ethnic studies continues to be attacked and maligned, as well as undermined and valued in the university and beyond. I find it striking, and perhaps not so coincidental, that it has been precisely during a time that ethnic studies as a field has had to fight to survive, many universities have increasingly embraced community-engaged research, as it has become a new metric by which they can be measured and valued. The community-engaged research agenda rooted in radical love, which I attribute to ethnic studies, however, has been and continues to be vital to my formation. I think of myself as an engaged scholar, it's true, but identify more as a scholar activist. I believe there is something distinctive about being a scholar activist rooted in ethnic studies that I'd like to center. For me, that distinction, again, is in love, radical love. Thinking through the meanings of radical love and how it shapes my scholar activist practice is one that I've been doing for a couple years now. And it's a project that's ongoing. I still haven't fully thought it out, but that's why I just want to show you what it's about. But I do have some thoughts. So in an earlier talk, which now has been published in an anthology entitled Closer to Liberation, Pinay, or Pinex, Activism and Theory and Practice, I wrote this: love. Love that is expansive, a love that emerges from and feeds into community, love that is rooted in our collective history, a love, therefore, that is radical, radical meaning from the roots, a radical love that attempts to root out the structures that attempt to annihilate humanity, annihilate all life, a love that roots out the structures of heteropatriarchal, white supremacist global capitalism and empire. For me, love, a feeling of intimate connection with communities, with our students, with each other, for ourselves. Love must be at the center of a Pinay or Filipina scholar activist praxis. Within the context of the ivory tower, that is the Western white supremacist heteropatriarchal university, love represents all that it is not. So how has radical love informed by ethnic studies and broader social movements showed up in my work? Well, after the late 1960s protests, that's me in college, led by the Third World Liberation Front at San Francisco State and later UC Berkeley, nearly all of the UC's campuses began to offer courses in ethnic studies. Nearly 30 years after its establishment as a field, I had the opportunity to take courses in ethnic studies while I was an undergraduate student at UC Santa Barbara. Taking university courses that focused exclusively on the experiences of communities of color were eye-opening to me. They were the first time I was encountering people like me in books assigned in a college setting, including the novel America's in the Heart by Filipino-American writer Carlos Bulosan. I vowed to get on a path that would allow me to share aspects of my lived experiences and the experiences of my community through my writing. It was the desire to have the stories of all of those that I love, my family, including my late mom, who was a nurse, came here as part of the waves of nurses from the Philippines who serve us and served us even most recently during the pandemic. My children. It was the stories of the community where I grew up. That's my high school. Very, very, very brown. Filipinx youth like me. I wanted our stories documented and shared in spaces of higher learning, spaces we were taught to revere that led me on this journey. My love for my family, my community, is both what prompted me to become a scholar and is what sustained me early in my career. It's why I chose Berkeley for grad school, so I could remain close to my hometown of Union City. While ethnic studies as a field gave me access to new academic texts that centered the experiences of people of color, and that prompted the beginnings of my journey, specific social justice movements would help to shape the kinds of research I would actually engage. Oh, yeah, okay, this is the right slide. I saw this quote once, and this is actually displayed in a place called Agbayani Village, which is in Delano, California. And I saw it as part of this pilgrimage tour that I do with my Filipino-American students, as connected to my Filipino-American course that I taught at UC Davis. So Agbayani Village in Delano was a project of the United Farm Workers, or UFW. The building of the Agbayani Village, you'll see this here on the bottom right, was a grassroots endeavor that the likes of students of the PACE, I mentioned PACE earlier, were also part. Many of the Filipinx farm workers in the UFW were actively involved in the anti-martial law movement of the Philippines in the late 60s and 70s and through to the 80s, which contested the fascist presidency of Ferdinand Marcos, whose son is now the current president of the Philippines. But this quote captures another way that my research has been defined by love for my people. I entered grad school with a purpose. I was mentored by activists from this very movement, and I just want to read the quote, right? The day we stop burning with love for our people, with love our people will die of the cold. But I was mentored by activists of this anti-martial law movement who made me believe that scholars could play a vital role in advancing justice, in shaping the world of ideas and broader movements for change. I came to see scholar activism as being about using the skill of writing, the training and research, and the privileges associated with my advanced degree to speak truth to power. Inasmuch as scholars, especially engaged scholars, chronicle and give voice to the struggles of the most marginalized, change does not come with our writing alone, but from the responsibility that comes in the making of history, of being actively engaged in social movements. So, one of the things I did to continue this project of scholar activism, to extend it to a broader community, is I helped to co-found the Critical Filipinx Studies Collective. Yeah, that's me right there too. While I was a grad student with a vision that it could be a space, and this was in the streets of an anti-war protest, with a vision that could be a space to sustain this purpose of sort of scholar activism. Beyond the work of research and teaching that typifies what most academics do, even if they identify as scholar activists, and even in the activist work that we led and participated in, like protests like this, we cultivated relationships of collective care for each other in CFSC, which is a further example of radical love. Our work also included just hosting events so that we could bring folks together over shared meals to support mentorship, even in an informal way. We organized what we hoped would be even an awards process to honor and affirm individuals who exhibit forms of scholarship and teaching that challenge that aren't necessarily always recognized in mainstream academia. So we were able to kind of really build these relationships in this collective, even as we were kind of doing scholar activist work. I'm proud to say it's still around. It's now 20 years old, and it's really played a key role in cultivating a new culture of scholar activist praxis among the members, its members in the field of Philippinic studies more broadly. And I would probably say that a lot of what I learned in that work there led in part and helped and was part of the ethos by which we organized together when I did get to Rutgers with Professor Dincy Flores when we created the Women of Color Scholars Group. Now, urgent issues facing the communities I love and the movements that address them have always shaped my work. I mean, these are all actions that I've been involved with. I've been in a relationship of commitment with and accountability to all of these movements as an active leader and member in various campaigns and organizations. For me, scholar activist praxis goes beyond so-called participatory action research. And that's kind of one of the methods nowadays, I think, often associated with community engaged research. But I'm trying to flip the script on that. It's sort of par, and I'm kind of thinking about this other formation of RAP, or research activating our people, which kind of shifts the focus of how research gets done. But I really believe it's important to work alongside movements in common struggle. It means being part of movements for justice together with folks in the community, attending meetings, planning and coordinating events, taking responsibility for tasks of importance to the organization that social justice organizations and movements require. And it's always sort of animated my work. Here, this is my first book, Migrants for Export. I had been working closely with Filipinx migrant workers. I chronicle the activism work of my colleagues in struggle in this recent anthology in Asian American activism. I think it's important to just say that, these are not time-delimited relationships defined by entering and exiting the field to accomplish a particular research agenda. This is a long-term investment of time constituted by relations of genuine reciprocity that are enduring. Scholar activism rooted in radical love isn't just about including community or activist voices, though I do that in my writing, but it's also to actually be active as a community member, even recognizing that some of the work you do may not necessarily get credit or have a place in academia. And this is just certainly true with my work here for this book, what became my book. But I spent a lot of time and did a lot of work relationship building when I came here to New Jersey. I helped to bring focus, Not only did I help organize actions, like this is actually an action that we helped to organize right there in Highland Park to bring attention to immigrant deportees. I also actually co-wrote this report based on immigrant detainees' letters, for which I did not claim authorship. This is by the collective. This is not a credit that I could put on my CV when I was I used to joke with my students, I have like a whole secret CV of the work I've done that, wouldn't get credit, certainly even in an institution that claims itself to be one committed to engaged research. Another thing that I was able to do is to ensure the longer-term sustainability of Filipinx scholar activist praxis. I founded the Bulusan Center. This was not a grant or university funding that led to its creation, as every single grant I wrote was rejected. We could talk about that, but it was a grassroots fundraising campaign and advocacy at the state capitol that led to the funding to support our work. We created partnerships in the community with labor unions, including this California Nurses Association, and other groups that have sustained our work, which is now in its 5th year. And these are partnerships I was able to activate because I have a track record as an activist and community organizer. Part of what I've done is actually use the neoliberal logics of the university against it. If the university tries to woo funders and donors to support its work, funders and donors who are tied to capital and empire, in the face of decreasing investments on the part of the state for public education, we used the same mechanisms to organize donations and funding for our center, sourcing smaller donations from hundreds of individual and organizational donors like this, even as we have accessed funding from the state through our advocacy. Again, being able to do all of this had everything to do with what I'd learned and done as an activist and organizer, not what I'd learned and done necessarily as a scholar or faculty member. Our center is supporting a new generation of scholar activists. I link students to support Stop AAPI Hate through media campaigns like this. We even helped to create, this actually was a recent press conference with California's Attorney General Rob Bonta to discuss issues related to anti-Asian hate in the state. We also helped to create and incubate a new progressive Asian American nonprofit called the Asian American Liberation Network, all through the center. Inasmuch as the university has increasingly embraced community-engaged scholarship or public scholarship, the truth of the matter is, like the elevator speech I mentioned at the start of my talk, much of my work in graduate school and through my career required that I frame my research as if it was done dispassionately, as though love has Though love has always been the big why that motivates my research and what has shaped my research process, I confined it to the marginalia, the preface in this book, the appendix in another book, quick dedications and still others. I cannot pretend that I've always been able to center love in my work in explicit ways. There are real risks that come with centering love. These are the limits. It can mean that your committee won't sign off on your dissertation, or blind reviewers don't accept your writing for publication, and when they don't, you lose a chance at tenure or promotion. To center love risks being deemed a scholar who lacks any seriousness, right? Doing research, a scholar whose findings might be suspect. It is hard enough to simply be a brown woman in these spaces, let alone a brown woman guided by love. Being back here at Rutgers, truth be told, has not been easy, as I am reminded of some of those challenges I faced while I was on the tenure track. The way some of my colleagues made me feel as if I wasn't good enough as a scholar. These are folks I even tried to hide my activism from. I don't think they had any idea what I was doing. It was problematic enough that my dissertation research, which focused on the globalization of low-wage migrant workers from the Philippines, somehow connected to my identity, though I'm a second-generation Filipino-American. A student who had applied to our graduate program to work with me was denied admission. Of course, everybody else's students got admission. She went on to do amazing things despite that rejection, but that was one example of how they didn't take me seriously. I barely got a chance to teach upper division courses or graduate courses. I mean, I was lucky to even have a chance to work with Dr. Bedley. I used to joke that I was the domestic worker of the department, doing all the labor of and taking care of the babies, teaching introductory courses, mentoring BIPOC students nobody else would, etc. I'm grateful to the few faculty of color that were in my department and scattered across the university for the community we created to eventually, somehow, earn tenure here. Though the job at UC Davis allowed me to return home and work in an ethnic studies department, which in turn allowed me to embrace scholar activism much more openly, gave me an opportunity to do things like found the Bulusan Center. Scholar activist work like that cannot fully live in the space of academia, at least not yet, not now. It is not a place where love can live and thrive. This became more apparent to me only a year after the successful launch of the Bluesun Center. Campus bureaucracy and politics have made things incredibly challenging for us. I get no credit or support for what I've done, despite the fact that UC Davis takes pride in its status as a community-engaged campus. By the second year of our center's operation, I was feeling burnt out and completely frustrated. Despite everything I had achieved, I have actually chosen to leave academia to pursue my activist scholarly work, my scholar activist work, more fully outside of it. The loss of my beloved Amado, my older son, in 2020, while he was serving indigenous communities ravaged by climate change-induced natural disasters in the Philippines, prompted me to reflect even more deeply on how I wanted to continue to sustain the work that I do. To ponder how I could continue to work and live in radical love, a process I was already doing at the start of the pandemic, as maybe some of you were doing too, but certainly accelerated by his loss. After Amado died at 22, we found a journal where he was pondering his purpose. He had just graduated from high school, and he wrote that he was guided by love. And it is his praxis of love which led him to take a lead in major social justice campaigns in the city of his birth, Oakland, California, with Black Lives Matter and with other organizations. It also led him back to his maternal ancestral homeland of the Philippines to learn from and serve indigenous communities. And it's all of that that now guides me. It's led me to this land to establish the Reimagination Farm, where we take on Asian American scholar activist Grace Lee's Boggs in treaty that the time has come for us to reimagine everything. We have to reimagine work and go away from labor. We have to reimagine revolution and get beyond protest. We have to think not only about change in our institutions, but changes in ourselves. The farm is the new site from which I intend to more fully accomplish my work as a scholar activist. It is where I hope to replant projects birthed at the Bluesun Center. It is my new classroom. Those are my students on the left. It is a site for new research and study, because I could tell you I didn't grow up planting. But it is the site that grounds a more expansive praxis for me of radical love. It's not lost on me that this talk comes while this university has been recently, and continues to be, I would imagine, as negotiations progress, mired in a major labor struggle. How does it become possible to produce engaged scholarship at an institution where emerging scholars struggle with debt, insecurity, and precariousness? What are our hopes as engaged scholars in a time when tenure-track professorship opportunities are few and career pathways uncertain? What are the challenges and opportunities for centers, projects, and programs in maintaining long-haul projects and partnerships in the face of changing campus contexts, leadership, and priorities? Through this talk, I've centered all that I have often had to push to the margins in the hopes that you, a newer generation of scholars of marginalized, a new generation of marginalized scholars, can work to better center the work towards the radical transformation that the university needs and that our communities deserve. And for those of you who cannot imagine working in the university or are simply unable to find a place given current conditions, I hope my new journey as a scholar activist outside the university offers a glimpse of other possible futures. Thank you. Oh, yeah, that's it. Not just my throat. Thank you so much. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I'll grab a water. We now have, stay up here, you're good. We now have time for Q&A. We have mics in the front of the room you'll see on both sides, so I would love for folks to come up with their questions. I'm gonna grab a water.
Thank you.
I can just pass the mic around. If you have a question, just let us know. We can bring you the mic.
I think here you go.
Oh, actually, I just appreciate, so I'm Joan Collier. I work with Crystal. I use she, her pronouns. I appreciate your work as a doc student. Took on some fun methodologies and methods. I was at the University of Georgia, and it's a fairly conservative state. And so my faculty were actually really helpful in helping us to subvert a lot of that and provide us cover in ways that my friends at other schools who were trying to engage in more community-based research were not shielded from. And so I was able to take on just some work that I'm grateful to have shared out here. I don't come from the same disciplinary background, so we talk about stuff different, but we're talking about the same thing. And so as an administrator, thinking about what a love ethic looks like in an institution is really challenging and what those limits are. And so to see it talked about in research is fun too. So I just appreciate you being here today. But I'm really here so that folks can get the mic. But I just want to offer that back. I'm so glad to actually meet you because Crystal rants and raves about you. So thank you for making her, helping her get to be doctor, because now I get to kick it with her. And I'm going to Dr. Castro for a question.
Thank you so much for being here and for that amazing talk and your work. I'm also excited that you're here. I've heard a lot about you also from Crystal and Zaide, so it's very nice to meet you. I would love to hear a little bit more about what you said. You kind of said it quickly, but you talked about RAP, the research activating people, instead, kind of, it seemed like a critique of PAR, but I'm not quite sure, so I would love to hear more about that. Plus, if we have time, would love to hear more about your new ventures in that land. I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm still in the process of really kind of thinking that through. So, it's funny, as soon as I exited, new opportunities opened up with many of the organizations I've been supporting for years. And so there's an opportunity to work with a particular organization that was sort of, it's a thing now, right? So many of these foundations are about evidence-based practice. So nonprofits are tasked with having to always track kind of and quantify, frankly, right, sort of the impact that they make, or at least to be able to have sort of databases that they can draw from to be able to justify funding in particular programmatic areas, right? So they felt like they needed to do this community needs assessment. I guess there's even kind of a thing called CNA, Community Needs Assessment, right? And so I was brought in, and I think part of, what I wanted to be able to do with them, and I think their vision too was many of these, the staff had gone to college and knew a bit about PAR. And so, for me, part of what I've done, and a lot of this is all moving still. I've only started this project, but I think part of what my critique of PAR had always been anyhow, right, is about the ways in which still research still gets driven primarily by the researcher, right? That is the truth. So that it gives us a framework as scholars to be able to do certain kinds of work, which is, and I think it's still important. It's not as if that contribution doesn't open up space for scholars like me or like you may also identify, right? It's still a way in which the research is primarily driven by the researcher. Or at least we better know how to frame it so that it looks like it came from us. To really, because even with my work, right, it became hard to frame for my Davis when I went up for full professorship. How weirdly funky my research trajectory had been. Because when you really pay attention to my work, the corpus, the body of my work, it goes also all over the place. Why? Because my commitments and the issues that affect the communities I care about, they shift and change as conditions in the world change. But I have to provide a narrative. So PAR, I think still there is a way in which researcher still drives research. It needs to be legible on those terms. I still think that there is not, the relationship is still, again, delimited to entry and exit from the field, which can mean that, once the PAR is done, you're done. And that, I think, just speaks to a kind of lack of commitment that I find really highly extractive. I think there are ways in which, there's critique of me search. But I actually think there's something valuable about a researcher being willing to offer up their own struggles, to share and be in this position of vulnerability that we demand that research subjects participate in. And that kind of mutuality, that shared experience, I think that those are the things that I'm not sure that PAR fully is able to address. And again, to what extent that research is meant for the organizations or movements in which it's done, it's not clear to me. And so I think by flipping it, I like the idea of rap. I'm a 90s child from California. Rap is a part of the soundtrack of my life. But it's also this, right? So it's about shifting, right? It's research for activating our people. There's the activation piece that I think is vital because it's about that. It's ours to claim this relationship of intimacy and oneness, I guess, with those with whom we're doing this work. That I think rap, and then also just kind of rap as so I call kind of these sessions PAR as opposed to kind of focus groups, sort of rap sessions, a chance for us to kind of, in an unscripted way, to kind of be in the flow of the call and response, right? We're participating in a way that's different than a kind of participant action research, or for me. So I don't know, I'm still kind of trying to work that out, but I think there are these critical pieces around, research for whom, who's driving these questions, vulnerability, commitment. I talk about commitment a lot. That's a real thing for me, what that means in terms of investment of time, of labor, of resources, of emotional investments. So those are the kinds of things I'm kind of thinking through with this thing that I'm going to call rap, and that I actually want to write about. I think that it might be a useful tool, although my primary audience will be, for organizations. Now, if it makes it to some kind of place where an academic sort of journal, that'd be great as a tool for others, but it's really meant, I think, because, it's scary to see how organizations are basically, they're trying to push out surveys. I'm like, y'all, there's something going wrong. Like, let's kind of think through a little bit about how even kind of nonprofits who have these aims are kind of reproducing what I find to be very kind of highly extractive, kinds of methods that are rooted in these structures of power that we're trying to actually dismantle, right? These are gendered kinds of practices, racialized, right? White supremacist kind of practices that I'm not trying to reproduce and support organizations in reproducing. So we need a new framework, I think. Thank you for the question.
Hi, Robin.
Hey, wow. Dr. D.
Thank you so much.
Came up in my
Thank
hometown
you.
too.
Yeah, thank you for this talk. I'm just kind of curious, given, your career, I'm starting out my career here. I guess, I'm just kind of curious, what love would you have wanted, or could you, if you could go back, what love would you show yourself as a early assistant professor? And I guess just for me, so we're both from Union City.
We went to the same high school.
Yeah, and
but much more before.
So I have moved here away from my community. In my field, we have to produce a high number of articles, and of course I'm new here, and I feel like I'm doing this academic thing by myself in my office, just physically disconnected, but community is always on my mind, but I do feel like I'm here for myself right now, or that's what it's felt like. So I'm just kind of curious, how, I don't know, what perspective maybe would be important for someone like me to keep in mind, and think, what's the things to keep in mind in terms of the bigger picture, the long-term trajectory, I guess.
Sure. I feel like I did it, in the sense that I wouldn't change anything. Because the reality is I still did it. I got to full professor. I got tenure here. I got promoted. I think, I have earned a place in academia, even on its terms. But I do think what helped, I didn't stop. I often advise this actually to my graduate students of color, BIPOC students, or folks who feel like they're on the margins, activists. Don't listen to what they advise you, especially if they're white. I'm gonna be real. Because they don't know what our experience is. If you are being told separate and stop and be on your own, you do everything against that. I created community right away. We connected, we created WOXI at great risk to us at the time. We didn't have tenure. We already knew they saw us as the brown ladies in the department. We knew this could get even worse. We had children too. But we did exactly the thing that they don't want you to do. Don't be involved in that kind of stuff because it's going to deviate from your projects. Don't do that kind of stuff because, you need to focus on publishing. I think, digging in my heels, creating community, remaking new kinds of community here in Highland Park in New Jersey, for me at least, is what, again, kind of keeping rooted, right, radical love to the things that I care about. That's what propelled. But it also takes an understanding of code switching, but we already know that. How do we not know how to code switch? If you're a brown or black person in academia, you've been code switching from the jump. Let's be real. So we already know. We're already imposters. I mean, I have a whole talk where I talk about, be the imposter. I don't want to be part of this. I'll stay an imposter. Because I'm going to just learn your language, perfect it for you, but I know what I'm doing this for. I know where my resources are. I know what this is about. Embrace that. Be in that space. It's a hard space. I'm not going to say it's easy. It took a lot out of me. Of course it did. It was a fight all the time, but I already knew. I could dress the part. I could talk the part. I would never be a part. And that's okay. And you could still, find the frameworks that make sense, because they exist, in fairness. Lots of scholars have been pushing the boundaries within our respective fields. There's a critical edge to all of the places where we might find ourselves. Find yourself there and grow that space of liminality, right? But for me, I feel like I wouldn't advise myself anything else because I made deep friendships here. We did good work in the work that we did here. And I still got to do all the things. But it also meant I did a lot of extra work. It also meant I sacrificed. Am I the most theoretically kind of, I don't know who reads my work. I'm not like the superstar of ethnic studies that maybe I could have been if all I did was write and think. I might be, the presidential addressee of, I don't know, do the presidential address of this association or that. What I got, distinguished for was my mentorship, not early career achievement. I'm okay with that. So, I think part of it is you have to make a decision for yourself. And, we will all make different decisions. And they will all we may always feel unsettled. For the longest time, I couldn't read my book. My first book, I couldn't read it. I was embarrassed by it. Why? I thought my people can't read this book. And yet, I'm here in this department. I'm also dealing with folks in my department who are making me feel like I'm not engaging in the right frameworks too. But I still got tenure. So I think I wouldn't say anything different. I would just say, you know what, you do you. And carve that other space. And I'm still have intact my sense of self. And I can still, friendships enduring friendships that I still lean on, even if we're not always in contact. That I would trade nothing out for it. I mean, those are the things that I value still. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez. And I just wanted to thank you for sharing a little bit about Amado's life with us and for letting us kind of share in your grief a little bit. I lost my brother in 2020, who I was really close to, and the institution does not allow us to grieve, doesn't give us space to grieve, whether it's collective grief from COVID, from Black children being murdered and shot almost every single day. It does not allow us that space. The only people who have allowed me this space at Rutgers are women of color who lead this work, my colleagues. And I wanted to thank you for bringing that into the room, but also ask, what role do you think grief has in our movements?
Yeah, that's a real thing. It's funny. Amado, my son, he was a product of two activists, two organizers. His father was very active in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. I was doing my thing. It's funny. He was the one who really started to kind of push back a bit around just kind of the ways in which, and not push back, I don't know if that's the right term, but he named these things, these dynamics that I don't think I fully understood until I lost him. Unfortunately, despite the fact that, his dad and I were partnered and shared all this vision, the truth of the matter is being at the forefront of all these struggles, we're constantly holding grief. When are we not holding grief and trauma? In addition to whatever grief and trauma we're experiencing individually. And Amado could see that. He's like, Mama, we got so much work to do on our healing. We need, something that counts, and in his terms, I think he was still trying to grapple with this, supporting mental health and healing. He's like, because, we hold so much. We hold so much for our people, but we hold so much just ourselves. And that never left me. It was really quick exchanges about that before he went off to the Philippines. But it's something I held on to, and it was stuff I would kind of uncover in his journals. And so I think for me, what that's meant is, at least in the work I'm doing now, so I established a new foundation in his name, the Amado Kaya Foundation. And our work has been in healing justice, and part of a network of BIPOC organizers, folks from the Highlander Center in the South, Black organizers there, folks doing work with Indigenous Hawaiian communities in Portland, sort of all spread out folks. But, doing this work of healing justice, because I think that he was right. He's right. That in as much as we can try to dismantle these systems, what those systems do to our very selves, and whether or not we in our movements are doing in the work of tending to these collective and individual griefs and traumas, I think we can't move forward if we're not tending to these wounds. And I think, this is where I think Grace Lee Boggs comes in. We need to kind of be in the space of dreaming and imagining, and also trying to experiment with the something new, I think, and to grow new things. Because I think so much of my work has been in the space of protest, been in the space of the things that we don't want. And I want to be in the space of the things we want. I think I get it better now. So yeah, it's a farm. I want to grow stuff, and I want to grow them right. I want to be in a right relation to the land. I want to restore. I'm a believer in restorative justice, and I believe in the restoration of the land and how it restores our sense of selves and our souls. That's what I want to do. And hope that it can be the space. I feel like ethnic studies opened a beginning, and there was a vision for what it could look like to transform the university. But I think some of the best lessons of ethnic studies are the ways it's grown outside of it. There's so many places in our movements where folks have taken up that work, and I think I want to continue to grow that work. So, I've got all these experiments brewing, and we'll see where it takes us. But I think part of it is, I've lost a lot already. There's nothing to lose now. We've all lost so much. What do we lose now? This is, so any failure that happens there, I don't see as failure, but just as, yet a new lesson from which we can grow and dream and make other better things. So thank you for acknowledging. Yeah, I do want to bring grief into our spaces. Bring all of it, our whole selves. We need to do that. I think that's part of the radical praxis of pushing back in this institution. There are institutions like this too. Oh, sorry.
And there's somebody else. Thank you, Robin, for just such an inspirational talk. I was taking a picture of a poster out there, and Crystal said, like, you're fangirling. Yes, I'm like, yes, I'm fangirling my sister. I had to get myself together, compose myself together, because there's so much emotion, the emotion that, we have to keep covert. And I so admire that you've, kind of made something or respected that emotion that we shared intimately and privately, and has become a fuel, right, for social change, and in thinking, like, it's the path of freedom that you found, and I've missed you a lot not being at Rutgers, and in some way I wonder how kind of moving beyond this institution and finding other institutional spaces to kind of, figure out that path or find that path, informs your ability to kind of move into a different space of building. So I'm just thinking relative to my experience, 16 years still here, and sort of the ways in which we ossify, in how we relate to our colleagues, our institutional spaces. And so my question is, from your experience of, being pushed or ebbing or whatever, finding a way in between the institutional spaces and finding what you call the liminal, right, the marginalia. If you have thoughts on what are the elements that might be useful to imagine, sort of that other spaces, even when you're within the, structural limitations of institutional landscapes that we might, navigate. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And yeah, I mean, I think that, part of the answer has been, and I think it sort of connects to an earlier answer, right, to kind of like work against and move against the these, because we start to get trained, right, to kind of like respond with a particular kind of impulse, right? It becomes even a part of who we are immediately. Like I said, I wrote my love letter to New Jersey in a preface that I knew nobody was going to ever read, really. And I think it's in the moments when I've pushed against what has become my normalized impulse under this, that the institution has really done a good job at working on in me, that it's in those spaces to work against that impulse and to, that other possibilities have emerged. Like even like with Woxie, when we did that together, we both knew. We took that leap. We already knew what the danger would be, and yet we did it anyway. Every moment that it's been against that kind of pulling you from the edge and pushing anyway, I think that's where I've found. And again, I think that's why I name it love. I think that's what it is. And frankly, I think more recently, losing Amato was horrible. I had to do so much work at healing myself. And in the process of healing, or beginning this process of healing from my grief as a bereaved mother, I also had to heal all sorts of other parts of myself. Thank God, there's a new space now where there are other kinds of healers out there. I think coming up, I don't feel like there were mental health practitioners that looked like us or folks who were doing all this decolonial sort of spiritual work. There wasn't this stuff, but they exist now and sort of proliferated in the pandemic, and I went to all of it, And I think that is where the space of possibility, to continue to kind of just go all the way down into, the depths of the things that I can't imagine, but to, kind of be excited by the possibility of the not knowing, which takes a lot of faith, frankly. We would never talk about faith, let alone love in academia, but that's been what it's been for me, whether you want to call it a faith in God, creator, spirit, ancestors. That's definitely been a crucial part. I think it's always been there in a way that I've never always felt brave enough to name. But more recently, I feel like I can. That's been part of it, to just go, because we will be held. And so far, I've been held a lot. So I'm just going to keep going. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking us on this journey. Yes, round of applause. We really appreciate your vulnerability and really showing how love can be the guiding light that will liberate us, right, from these systems. So thank you all. We're going to transition now into the lunch portion, but know that you get to continue the conversation. That's the beauty of the way that today is structured. So get some food, come back and hang out, have a chance to interact with Dr. Rodriguez and each other. And thank you all for your time today. Looking forward to continuing with the meet and greet. One more round of applause, please.